243 weeks overdue? Man. That's excessive.
Good afternoon. It is Monday, February 5, 2018, just a little after 3:30. This is the February meeting of the Meridian Transportation Commission. I will call roll. Tracy Hopkins.
Here.
Ryan Lancaster.
Present and back from the swamp.
Stephen Lewis.
Here.
David Ballard is here. Brent Consachuk is absent. Ryan Leslie.
Here.
Ryan Hall.
Here.
David McKinney. Here. Britton Davis.
Here.
Excuse me. Erica Bowen. Luke Kavanagh. John Martin is here.
Here.
Tony Tisdale. Here. Good afternoon. Anna Gilbert. And Miranda Carson.
Here.
Very good. Adoption of the agenda is item 2. Any discussion on the proposed items? Hearing none, is there a motion, Mr. Lewis?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Thank you, Mr. Hopkins. We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda as presented. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Approval of minutes from the January 8, 2018 meeting. Any troublesome points, typos, anything we need to comment or discuss? Mr. Lancaster, is that shake of the head a motion to approve the minutes?
Mr. Chairman, given that I was absent at the last meeting, sure, why not? I move to adopt the minutes from the January meeting.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Mr. Lancaster. Old business items, transportation projects update. Mr. Hood.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, beginning on page 7 of your packet is my February version of the transportation projects update. As is typical, I'm not going to run through everything in the next few pages of your packet, but just highlight some things to draw to your attention. All the changes, though, between last month and this month are bolded within the memo. Everything else is pretty static month over. But the first one I do want to talk about is on page 7. Some of you I know have noticed Pine Avenue is closed right now between Locust Grove and Meridian Road. They've completed the milling, so yeah, we were joking, about 18 inches or so down, 2 feet down is how deep that goes. Water and power are being worked on currently. Again, this project is planned to be complete in September, so it'll probably be about August before the roadway gets back open fully, but maybe they can advance sooner. But that's kind of what we're looking at here. The next several months, it'll be a construction zone. I'll move on then to page 8 and highlight a couple projects here. The first one being Linder Road, Ustick to McMillan, and also at the same time have you draw your eye to the next project, Linder Road, Cayuse Creek to Chinden. So ACHD is looking to advance the first project that I mentioned, Ustick to McMillan, to basically coincide with the construction of the second one, so they'd both be done in 2019. And if that in fact happens, that would give you improvements all the way to Chinden Boulevard. So a little bit of a gap there where the improvements already exist, I guess, reverse gap. The improvements already exist between McMillan and Cayuse, but this would complete that whole that whole 2-mile segment if that advances. And then the next project down, 10-mile McMillan to Chinden, ACHD is looking to advance construction of that project up to 2020, where it's currently planned for 2022. Just a little bit more on that. That is in anticipation of working a deal with the Costco development, ACHD to design it, and then turn the plans over to Costco to make those roadway improvements to correspond with an anticipated store opening that hasn't been through the entitlement process yet, but that's kind of where it's going on the transportation side. So just wanted to kind of draw your attention to those couple of things. That's it. Mr. Chair, highlights this month. One more, page 10, State Highway 16. The ITD board, we mentioned this last time, and Ms. Tisdale kind of corrected me in that the ITD board did put the $6 million for State Highway 16 design and the tip. That was through RTAC just a couple of weeks ago, so it's moving forward to that project. So I just wanted to give you an update that it isn't official yet, but it is moving through the process there on State Highway 16 for design. But with that, Mr. Chair, those were the few projects that I wanted to touch on. But if you want to talk about any of them, I would stand for those questions or comments. Or
Any questions of Mr. Hood? Hearing none, we'll mark 4A as completed for this meeting. Item 4B, the Franklin Road, the Eagle Road, and the Lake Hazel Road speed limit study results. There's a memo attached. Mr. Martin.
So I don't know if you want to go over each one of these segments individually, but I guess first I just wanted to start with defining what Josh is reporting on here. Some of you may or may not be familiar with some of the terms. So the segments we looked at, first one we looked at was Eagle Road, Victory to Amity, currently posted at 45 miles an hour. So first thing he reports on is average speed being 44 miles an hour, average speed being just that. We take the number of people and divide that into the cumulative sum of the speeds. So it's a true average. 85th percentile, that is the speed at which 85% of the vehicles are traveling at that or lower. That is, when you read the MUTCD, one of the first things it talks about is looking at the 85th percentile. It's what a lot of agencies use as one of the first baselines at setting a speed limit. The pace is the 10 miles per hour range that has the most drivers in. So you take 10-mile increments, and whichever percent or whichever range has the highest percentage in, that's what you call the pace. So in this one, the pace being 40 to 49 miles per hour, percent in pace 74%. The percent that came in under is 16, and then the percent over was 10%. Ideally, you would like to have your speed limit inside that pace, just as a good rule of thumb. So in this one we do, the speed limit is 45. That'd be basically right in the middle of the pace. That being said, you can go in here and read what Josh has written. He doesn't recommend any changing at this time of the posted speed limit, which is 45. 80th percentile is, like we said, 49, but the pace is 40 to 49, so we feel that is appropriate at this time. As things continue to develop, obviously we will continue to look at speed limits. These are always something that are dynamic, they're always changing. Development comes in, roadways change, the roadway conditions along the road change. So I don't know if do you want me to cover these one by one, or you just want me to go right to the bottom line? I guess I'll do whatever the commission would like.
I think the bottom line gets us there,
Okay.
Martin, unless...
So we looked at that segment of Eagle. Then we looked at 2 miles of, well, I guess 1 mile of Lake Hazel from Eagle to Cloverdale. And then we looked at several segments along Franklin Road as well. Franklin, Eagle to Locust Grove to Maine, Meridian to Linder, Linder to 10 mile to Black Cat. So basically from Eagle Road all the way out to Black Cat on Franklin. And then the bottom line is Josh is recommending that we raise the speed limit on Franklin from Eagle to Locust Grove and from 10 mile to Black Cat. They're currently posted at 40. That would give us an increase to 45. And then looking at the big picture of Franklin, that would mean that Franklin from Black Cat to Linder Road would be 45. And then from Linder to Locust Grove would then be 45, or 40 miles an hour, excuse me. So basically the 1 mile section on each side of Meridian would be 40, but then once you got outside of the, what we would consider like the central part of Meridian, we'd be going to 45. Because that's the bottom line of things.
Okay. Questions for Mr. Martin?
Can I ask a question?
Ms. Carson?
So from Eagle to Locust Grove is gonna be 45 and then it's gonna go back down to 40?
With the proposal, yes.
Okay.
Anything else for Mr. Martin?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lancaster?
so as I read through my packet, I see that our commission requested this from ACHD in December. And so if that's the case, I appreciate ACHD's prompt service on this. But I'm hoping that one of you can refresh my memory why we asked for this. December seems like a long time ago all of a sudden, but.
Mr. Hood?
I can help. There's actually 2 requests. The Franklin corridor, Sergeant Arnold was the one that actually brought that to your attention after the last segment of Franklin was opened, and then they were talking about some of this discrepancy. So he's the one that originally asked. We said, hold on a minute, let's ask ACHD to either do a new one, or if you have existing data, tell us what's going on there. So that's the Franklin Road corridor study. The other 2 were related around a development that was proposed in that general area of Lake Hazel, Amity, kind of in that general area, and neighbors testifying before the city council, and the city council saying, to the Transportation Commission, they can work with ACHD to see if speed limit changes are necessary or not. Now, just a little bit more on that. They were concerned about the speeds and walking and this interface of urban, it was rural, it's becoming more and more urbanized. We can't get our mail that's across the street. So it's more about volume, maybe a combination of volume and speed. To put words in these people's mouth, I guess a little bit, is 50 miles an hour, and now they're coming all the time. I can't get across the street to get my mail ever. That was kind of the request, particularly on Lake Hazel. But again, it's rural, a lot of people's mailboxes are on the other side of the road. That's why we asked, maybe just one, and I'm sorry I didn't catch this earlier, I actually caught it last month. So just to further your point, I do also want to thank ACHD for reacting, and Josh and Sean and their team for doing this so quickly. They actually had it done last month, if you recall, and we just ran out of time. So this is the first time we've actually been able to give it back to you and talk about it a little bit. So yeah, they were super quick to respond and do that. Just one clarification though, the segment of Lake Hazel that they evaluated was a mile off. It was actually the next mile over between Locust Grove and Eagle, not Eagle and Cloverdale. So I imagine you'll end up with a similar story. I doubt that, based on this, I don't think it's going to change anything. Half of that mile is in Boise and the other half's in Meridian. And they don't propose to change anything in either place, but I imagine you're going to see the same things. General same average speed, an 85th percentile, 50 miles an hour probably still makes sense when you look at it like this. So, but that's why. Sorry, that was kind of a long-winded answer. It's unfortunate that Sergeant Arnold isn't here right now, but he's the one that brought the Franklin Road corridor study up, so.
Very good. Anything else, Mr. Lancaster?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, so, yeah, that helps a lot. Thank you, Caleb. And again, Sean, thank you for the prompt study. I guess a couple of questions for you, Sean, if I may, Mr.
You may.
Chairman. I guess I'm interested in just I don't know if I've asked this before. If I have, I've forgotten the answer. But what is ACHD's philosophy to speed limits as far as, setting a consistent speed limit for a entire corridor, or do you break it up into, segments that seem to make sense as far as, road characteristics? I'll start with that question, I guess.
Yes. Commissioner Lancaster, I would say both. We do look at corridor wide, but we also do break them up into mile segments. Given that each mile of a roadway can be different, you could have, parks along a 1 mile segment, and you may have back on residential at the next mile. So we do like to have a speed limit set corridor that, if we can make it the same, that makes it, I think driver expectation is nice if you say, hey, the speed limit on Franklin Road is 40 miles an hour. But we also recognize that not every roadway develops at the same time. A lot of it depends on adjacent land uses. And sometimes adjacent land uses can also skip a mile, or you may have nothing for a mile and then, development for that next mile. And then maybe you might go back to having nothing for the next mile again. So I guess it's not an easy question to answer. So I guess I would just leave it at both.
Okay. Fair enough, thank you. Mr. Chairman, if I can ask one more of Mr. Martin.
You have one left.
All right, thank you. I leave for 1 month and the rules tighten up on me, I guess. Sean?
I'm about to keep a number for you.
Sean, my second question for you. As I read through Josh's commentary, it seems that Josh recommends or tends to recommend rounding down, I guess. If looking at the 85th percentile, he tends to round down rather than round up, even though the 85th percentile might indicate to round up. So, I mean, is that a philosophy of ACHD as well? I recognize that these are ACHD's roads and that you have the authority to set them for whatever you want. And so I appreciate this study and your explanations, but I guess these are my questions about how ACHD approaches these speed limits.
Sure. Yeah, I don't think we don't have anything in our policy or any guidance that says we, must round down or must round up. I think it's kind of looking at all the things in consideration with the average speed and the pace and the adjacent land uses and the schools in the area and the pedestrians and bicyclists. I think it's just part of the whole picture that we try to look at.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else for Mr. Martin? Ms. Martin, appreciate the information and the quick turnaround time. We do appreciate that. Item 4B.
Question real quick. Is there
Yes.
any comments needed from us to approve, yay, nay, yes?
Thank you.
Concur.
Commissioner, on page 11, I kind of laid that out for you all. After reviewing and discussing the results, if the commission wants to go forward with the recommendation for the 2 segments that Sean mentioned there on Franklin, so no change on Lake Hazel or Eagle, a motion to ask the city council to ask ACHD to change that would be appropriate if that's what you'd like to do.
Make that motion.
Okay,
Second.
we have a second from Mr. Davis. Mr. Mr. Lancaster, is there a further comment?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I do have a comment, thank you. I guess my comment is do we need to send this to the city council, or can we, I guess, express our support or concurrence or whatever with ACHD and just say move forward? And I ask that in part because, as Caleb reminded me here a minute ago, the city council sent us the issue, and so it would seem that we have the ability just to say, this sounds good to us, and ACHD, we recognize that you can do whatever you want with the speed limit on the road anyway. And I guess my comment or question is, it seems that we have the authority in this commission just to act.
So, Mr. Chair, I can address that. You don't have to make a recommendation to the city council. As you mentioned, ACHD can make the speed limits whatever they want. But I will just reference under duties and powers of this commission, number 7 reads, review and make recommendations to city council on rules and regulations related to speed limits. You don't have the authority to direct ACHD or act. Now, again, you could be silent and they're gonna make the changes. Right. Or you can follow our process and I'll let one way or the other, I'll let the council know or ask them to petition ACHD. I mean, the ACHD seems to be on it anyways. So you do have some discretion in there. You don't have the authority to just act.
Right.
If you want to just act, you could thank ACHD for looking at this and leave it there. But we can't ask them to make any changes without going up the ladder.
Mr. Hood, Mr. Lancaster, I think that makes, within our task, so we're an advisory group. And to the extent that we get to deliberate or ask for information and then hear what it is, within that ability to make a recommendation in an advisory capacity, somewhere saying, we find this reasonable, it's acceptable, we appreciate it, it sounds logical to us. So with that, you say to the city council, we found favor with it and it seems to make sense.
Mr. Chair, just to follow up on that, that's simply what I would do. Or not, we could just, I feel like I need to close the loop with them because they did ask you to look at it, you did.
Okay.
Here's what ACHD found, and
So, Mr. Hall, would we amend that to say we're recommending that they adopt the study?
My recommendation was based on the memo on page 11 saying that we recommended the city council, so my motion stands.
Okay, so it's a recommendation of the study. Okay, and we have a second by Mr. Davis.
yes.
Okay, call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Item 5A, Valley Connect 2.0. Stephen Hunt.
Should just be able to advance, go back. I don't know if you want to give me more fancy than that.
Mr. Hunt, welcome.
Thank you.
I noticed that you came in, so you're filling in for
I'm
Rhonda,
filling-
are you?
Yes.
Okay, I should have recognized you earlier. My apologies.
Well, I was sitting in the audience, so I should have made myself known.
Well, I saw you creep up there, rather stealthily. So,
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk about Valley Connect, if I may.
go ahead. Do you know all the commissioners, or maybe just a brief introduction on your own as to who you are and what brings you over here, other than someone saying, go over there?
Sure, I will do that.
Okay?
So my name is Stephen Hunt, and I am the principal planner of Valley Regional Transit. I've been there since April. Prior to that, I was working with King County Metro in Seattle. Before that, I was in grad school at the University of Illinois in Chicago. And before that, I was working for Valley Regional Transit right here in Meridian, where I worked for a couple of years. Before that, I was a student at Boise State. So I grew up and went here to Meridian High School. and have always wanted to be able to come back and make an impact on transportation issues and the way communities grow. And that's been sort of the reason that I've followed a career in transportation and transit specifically. So what I wanted to talk about today is Valley Connect, which is a draft plan that we have that the Valley Regional Transit Board approved for public comment last January. And so we're right now in the period of public comment on Valley Connect. And the memo that you just got handed includes a public engagement calendar on the back, which largely outlines the number of different presentations we'll be making to city councils and other forums. So this is our first with the draft plan with the City of Meridian. I was here earlier in the summer to talk about an even earlier draft version of Valley Connect, but hopefully we'll be able to get into some more details on this go-around. So the presentation is just to talk about Valley Connect and collect your input on the draft plan, as well as solicit your support on getting additional public comment on it, and your comments on how it supports development and activities here in Meridian. So I wanted to begin actually just by defining a couple of terms, because I'm going to and concepts that we'll get into. But so real simple, just want to talk about what it means, what I mean when I say urban, and what I mean when I'm going to say freedom throughout this presentation. So by urban, all I mean is anytime that there's excessive competition for public space. That's all I mean by urban. So here, this might be kind of a typical scene that you would see in what you might think of an urban space, is lots of people trying to use the roadway, lots of different modes, people on the sidewalk, lots of buildings around. But you can also see that same kind of occurrence happening in what maybe appear to be more suburban or rural scenarios. So this is a picture of Meridian Road, northbound in the afternoon. You get a lot of traffic that is backed up on there by the Albertsons. You've got a lot of competition for that public space. So then freedom. All I mean by freedom is being able to go get where you want, when you want, to do what you want. And so this starts from the supposition that to do the things that we would like to do throughout the day, usually that means I'm one place and that opportunity or that activity might be someplace else, and how I bridge that gap is the essence of the freedom that we're talking about. So how do I get from where I am, wherever I may be right now, to the opportunities I'm trying to achieve? Whoops. So that's what I mean when I say freedom. So another couple of concepts that it's helpful when we look back to realize that urban environments are inherently crowded. By definition, they're crowded. So this is whether you're talking about in the days of horse and buggy, that's downtown Boise, or you're talking about the days of streetcars. Streets were crowded then too, or today we have cars and people in the streets today. So we want to start with the recognition that urban environments are by their definition crowded. But a couple of things that flow from that I think are really interesting as we think about transportation, which is that the public's freedom is determined by how we allocate that space then. So that space that has excessive competition, that's driven by how the public sector divvies up that space, how they allocate that space. And so these two images are trying to illustrate that. It's really obvious when you see these two canyons of like really high density development. I'm sorry. That how you allocate the sidewalk and the space in between those buildings is going to have a real impact on people's ability to get through those spaces. But that's just as true even when you're talking about two-lane rural highways or roadways where there isn't sidewalks, or you can see here you've got people who are trying to use that space. The people's ability to get from where they are to where they're trying to go is determined by how we look and allocate that public right-of-way. So that leads us to another interesting point, which is that because freedom is such an important thing that people are after, that what cities choose to accommodate will be the thing that people choose to use. So what cities choose to accommodate is what people will choose to use. So whether you're talking about freeways, people, if that's the means that are connecting people to their opportunities, that's what people will use. If you are accommodating those opportunities with parking lots, that's what people will use. If you accommodate them with bicycle lanes, that's what people will use. if you accommodate that by transit, that's what people will use. And again, the reason for that is because what drives people to make those decisions isn't the mode itself, but it's the desire to participate in the activity that they're trying to get to. In other words, to exercise that freedom. So with those three things in mind, that's pretty interesting to think about what role then public agencies have in thinking about how we allocate that space. And that is what brings us then to Valley Connect and what we're trying to accomplish with Valley Connect 2.0. So I wanted to start out with a couple questions about why we are doing Valley Connect and its relationship to development and activities here in the City of Meridian. Start with why is it important for transit to be part of Meridian's future? Is because transit is better use of public space. You look at one bus can carry the same number of people as what 19 vehicles at the current auto occupancy. One full bus carries as many people as what 19 vehicles carry in the current auto occupancy. That's the difference of 40 feet to 280 feet. Visually, that looks like this difference. So it's almost a full block of back-to-back cars compared to a single bus. Transit also saves money. If you're able to accommodate your travel needs or exercise that freedom by using transit as opposed to owning and operating your own vehicle, households can save up to $9,000 a year. And that's real savings that come back to the households. At a household level, at a community level, we spend in Ada and Canyon County about $1.5 billion on owning and operating our own, actually not so much the owning, just on operating and maintaining our cars. So if you don't think about the initial purchase of the car, but just the gas and maintenance of the car, that's $1.5 billion that we spend a year on our automobiles. We spend $15 million on transit operations, which incidentally is about half of what we spend on public school bus transportation. Not half, it's less than half of what we spend on public school transportation across Ada and Canyon County. It's about $35 million that we spend on public school buses throughout the two-county area. But if you're able to move people on transit, that can save them both individually at a household level and then regionally at a community level a lot of money. And then also, transit really supports the communities in the way they develop. And so we'll look a little bit more at that, at how, specifically how Valley Connect can support what Meridian is trying to accomplish in being the center of the valley and connect people to the many opportunities that there are right here in the city of Meridian. So the outcomes of Valley Connect, we're planning to grow the transit service by 4 times what it is today, and that's based on both what Communities in Motion is suggesting we should be by 2025. It's also a comparison of where our peers are. We spend between a quarter and a fifth of what our peers spend on public transportation operations on a per capita basis, the peers being Spokane or Reno or Madison, Wisconsin, or Tucson, Arizona. And by increasing that amount of service, we'll be able to have as many as 9 different frequent corridors. So that'd be services that come 15 minutes or better throughout the day, which allows people just to be able to show up and go on transit as opposed to wait behind a schedule. Extend the span of service, so service would go till 9 p.m. or later, 7 days a week. We'd also be talking about doing investments in roadways to help transit move faster through congestion. And the result of all of that is we would expect that transit ridership would increase by 800% to where we have over approximately 10 million boardings a year, up from 1.2-ish today. And so we're quadrupling the amount of service, and we're expecting to be able to double the productivity of that. And that's because when you do that, when you go from hourly service or half-hourly service to service that comes every 10 to 15 minutes, the people who use it that much more often. In addition to those fixed route expansions, we'd also be looking at deploying mobility as a service, and that means looking at how we can integrate with Lyft and Uber and other kinds of technologies to make those first and last mile connections and make it a more seamless transportation option between using transit and getting to your final destination. So a few quick words on costs. So there are 2 scenarios in Valley Connect. We look at an intermediate scenario and a growth scenario. Compared to today, when we look at spending about $10 million on just the fixed route portion of public transportation in Ada and Canyon County, intermediate scenario would double that. The growth scenario would quadruple that. In terms of the capital costs, I'll show some more on the next slide, but you can see that those costs also increase between the intermediate and growth scenario. Breaking down those capital costs, a large portion of that is in buses. But as we look at the growth scenario, we're also making a significant investment in corridor improvements, so that's helping the buses move through traffic faster. We're also making significant investments in passenger amenities. If you have 10 million boardings a day, that means you've got 10 million times a year that you have somebody who's at the sidewalk, getting on the bus, getting off the bus, making sure that those stops and the information at those stops is adequate. Is part of what that would be going to pay for, as well as additional technology that would let people know when the bus is coming better and do better trip planning. There'll also be investments in park and rides and the needed maintenance facilities for the buses and vehicles. So the network itself was guided by different policies. There were 5 network design policies that were intended to achieve the right kind of design of the network and size of the network. So how the network is designed is going to impact the way people can connect to those different opportunities. And then in addition to the network design principles, we also had different route design guidelines. So how we design the routes intended to ensure that we have productive and efficient route design. The result of that, I just wanted to now show a couple of examples of what this means for the city of Meridian in terms of the network. This map is the existing service in Meridian, and so we have really kind of 2 options, both oriented around the I-84 corridor. One is a local service that comes in on Meridian and goes through the corporate park and then out to Franklin and up to Eagle again and then down Overland Road. That's the one connection. The other is on Overland between 10 Mile and Meridian, and that's an express connection that goes on into downtown. And so those are the 2 different kinds of service options within the city of Meridian. Virtually none, though, that help people move within the city. In the future, we would be expanding that to have connections that really begin to support the development that is here already and is coming more to the city. So you can see that you have high quality service all the way on Overland Road all the way between 10 Mile and Eagle. So the planned development between 10 Mile and Eagle, as well as what's already there around Mountain View High School, all of that would have new transit connections. We'd also be looking at making improved connections on Chinden between Nampa and Boise. So a lot of the development that's occurring in that corridor, we would begin to support with additional transit service. We would also be looking to extend service into Meridian from the east on Overland Road, on Franklin, on Fairview, on Ustick, and a lot of those actually converging on the village, where it becomes a major hub on the east side of the city. We'd also be extending service between Cherry Lane and Franklin on Meridian Road, and have north-south connections on Linder. And connecting to Kuna, making a connection between Kuna to the south down Meridian Road, or potentially down Linder Road, making the way into Meridian. So the sum of that network, though, when I come back to this concept of what it means, of this concept of freedom, we can show what that means. So today, if you are standing at the village, it's easy to know what you can get to, because there is no transit service at the village today, and so you can get to exactly what you can walk to if you're not going to be using biking or automobile. So that's what this map is showing here, is just how far can you get on your foot and by transit today in 15, 30, 45, and 60 minutes. Just so you know, there are about, I think it was 17,000 jobs within that kind of, not the 60-minute, but within that 45-minute circle. There's about 17,000 jobs and about 24,000 people within that distance. When you look at how that freedom changes with the growth scenario, you can see the Meridian really does, from the transit perspective, become the center of the valley again. You have connections into downtown Boise, again along those major thoroughfares of Ustick, Fairview, Overland, and then continuing to the west and to CWI on Cherry Lane and Franklin. And when you look at the total number of jobs and households that now are accessible to the village, that grows from that 20,000 to over 85,000 jobs. I'm sorry, 85,000 households and 125 or so thousand jobs are within within 45 minutes of transit. So it really helps to me, this helps show kind of what the impact of transit can be on people. So in addition to that fixed route service, we would be looking to leverage the advancements in technology to be able to ride between the lines. So talk about fixed route service, those lines on the maps, how do you get in between those lines? We'd be looking at using Lyft and Uber or other dynamic types of ride-hailing services to make those last-mile connections. We also would be looking to expand programs like what's in Boise with the Boise Green Bike to be able to make, again, those first and last mile connections to the transit services and hubs. We also would be using these types of services to make the changes to existing service better, so mitigate any impacts to existing service, and coordinate efforts with social services. So like today with the services we have with Harvest Transit, that would fit within kind of this mold of first and last mile connections or riding between the lines. How do we make it work for folks that are having trouble getting to those fixed route services? So we'd be building on that capacity. So last couple of slides. We are as I mentioned, we went to the Valley Regional Transit Board and they adopted the draft plan in January, and we're in the public comment period. There is a link on the memo that was handed out to you today to the full plan online. We also have a survey that we will be looking to get out to the public. We're hoping to work with city councils to potentially have a link to both the plan and the survey and use whatever other kind of means of contacting different distribution groups that we can to make sure that we get a broad representation of input from the public on the plan. So I think I covered most of these just now, but in addition to the support with getting stakeholder feedback and public feedback, we would be working with the City of Meridian and this commission to coordinate any near-term activities. The City of Kuna is interested in the connections between Kuna that would come into downtown Meridian. Cities of Eagle and Star and Middleton as well are interested in new connections between them and Meridian. And we also are interested in developing kind of these corridor stretches where we'd be looking at employers and other services where they may also be interested in supporting transit service along to those destinations, whether that's Sensi or Blue Cross of Idaho or any of those other businesses up and down Eagle Road. And then, again, as things come online with additional technology, we'd be looking to deploy those throughout the two-county area. So I think that takes me to the end of the presentation, but I hope that gave you enough to begin asking me any questions or any reactions. So I'll stand for any questions.
Comments, questions for Mr. Hunt, commissioners?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Hopkins?
Mr. Hunt, so typically you mentioned that our peers are doing a better job at this. How are they financing this? I mean, how do we get there?
Right. So there are lots of different kind of, you look at the country over, and there are lots of different ways that the public transportation ends up getting funded. Oftentimes there is state support for it in some fashion, but even so, there is almost always some kind of local local taxation that is part of that. The city of Tucson is interesting because they actually don't have any state funding that supports their system. It's all done by the city of Tucson itself. So there are a variety of ways that we can look at raising the revenue, but the truth is we do need to find the money, right? I mean, none of this happens for free, but it's equally true that we spend an awful lot of money today on our transportation, and so what we're interested in doing is finding ways to open up that dialogue to say, if we were to spend that money differently, could we lower the cost of transportation to the residents of Ada and Canyon County? And that's what we're excited about trying to pursue with Valley Connect.
Thank you.
Anything else? Mr. Davis?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Hunt, how much of that 191 is going to be the City Meridian's job, the $191 million? How much is that our job, or is that going to be shared within other cities around?
So the 191 would be capital costs, and these are just an estimate for total costs. So that in capital, more than in operations, there are opportunities to get federal funds as well for grant funding. There tend to be more opportunities to find funding for capital. So I can't say right now what the funding burden for the city of Meridian might be for either the capital or the operating component of this. But what we did not develop a specific funding plan with Valley Connect at this point. What we wanted to be able to do is say kind of what the gap is, and then come back and start to say where can we start to make some movement. And we are interested, as well as engaging the private sector, talking to industry about how important is it to them to find ways to get their employees to work. And when you can get a whole corridor of folks interested in that, then you can start to talk about, realize the amount of money that might be necessary to support a connection. Also looking at residential programs where we might be able to find ways of directly getting it. So you might think of it as fares, but the same way we go to an employer and say, enter into a pass program with all the employees, and that generates some revenue, we could do the same thing on the residential side of trying to get folks to support transit via those means. Again, along a focus corridor. So think of it this way. This gives us the ability to start to ask those questions. We don't have those answers as yet.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lancaster?
So, Mr. Hunt, this is an excellent presentation, and I thank you for being here. I have two questions for you. My first one is, so this is some very good information, but I'm wondering what action, if any, you're requesting from this group.
So I suppose one is just a request for support on getting the word out to the public. So if there are any listservs or any ways that this commission might be able to increase awareness about the plan for within the city of Meridian specifically, we would be keen on working with you to do that and push out information about the plan as well as a survey. And then secondly is, I know that it's not the commission's job to raise funds, but to the degree that we can begin to consider how important transportation issues are to the continued development and growth of the city of Meridian, it would be helpful, I believe, for there to be some general support from the commission about a multimodal approach to addressing the growth in the valley and in Meridian specifically.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I think our commission has, in the past, generally been supportive of, making recommendations to the city council, for funding and that sort of thing, and I would anticipate that we would be willing to do so again in the future, so I appreciate your answer. My second question gets into the weeds a little bit. From your slides, you had a line item for corridor improvements, and you mentioned that briefly. I guess I'm interested in what else.
That includes.
Yeah, what is that? Yeah.
So There's a wide span of things that one could consider for transit improvements in a corridor, and all that's a kind of this line item represents is about $600,000 a mile to help improve the movement of transit through existing congestion. So the things that might include would be, there's a thing called transit signal priority, where you might be able to keep the light green a little bit longer as a bus is approaching, or shorten the cycle as when a bus is in queue. There are ways that we could work with ACHD to get other things called queue jumps. Most of them tend to be about how you get a bus through an intersection faster. Those would be the types of things that you would be looking to do. There could also be things like doing in-lane stops, which is another thing that is different and potentially controversial, but it has the effect of keeping the bus not necessarily in motion, but having it not have to merge back with traffic after making the stop. So that speeds up the transit trip. So that's capital investments in a corridor to help make it easier for the bus to move through existing traffic. All the way to the other extreme, which would be like a transit-only lane. This $600,000 a mile is nowhere near enough to say like buy right away. It would be enough to paint, but then you're talking about how you manage the other capacity. And so those are the types of conversations that we see ourselves wanting to get into. But and certainly when we get to that point, there I think will be opportunity for this commission to weigh in on the importance of that.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else for Mr. Hunt? Well, Mr. Hunt, thank you for the presentation, bringing us up to date. Very robust plan.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Hood.
just real quick before you move on to the next agenda item, I wanted to let you know that VRT will be giving a similar presentation to the City Council in March 13th, I believe. So you do have an opportunity if you want to go to the link that he's provided, do some more fact gathering, understand what the plan is. I could potentially table this, it's not an action item today, but if you'd like to have that carry forward to your next agenda, discuss it, and see if there is a recommendation that you'd like to move forward to the City Council. That is possible just based on the timing. They're not scheduled to get this similar presentation for another 5-6 weeks. So anyways, just wanted to let you know that is an option, but it's not an action item today, so you don't have to do anything. You could do it individually if you'd like. The public comment period, as Mr. Hunt just mentioned, is open, or I will just refer to him previously. Meridian City Code 272, Commission Authority, subsection 8, review and make recommendations to the City Council regarding public transportation, including transit services. So there it is again. It is one of your charges, is to make recommendations on things of this matter. So.
Further comments? Do we want to put that to our March meeting? Hearing none? Okay, we'll move, let's see. 5A is concluded. 5B, I don't see Sergeant Arnold. 5C, ACHD Pedestrian Advisory Group. David Cochran. Did I get that right, sir?
You were close, Corcoran. So, hi there, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. So, I'm here today, just real quick. I'm a senior transportation planner with ACHD, but I'm here today as the staff representative for the Highway District's Pedestrian Advisory Group, and I'm here today just to throw out a teaser. It sounds like we're going to have a vacancy here soon, and we're wondering if somebody from the Meridian Transportation Commission might also be interested in sitting on this group. This is similar to our Bicycle Advisory Committee or our ADA Advisory Committee, in that it is a recommending body similar to you all that sits with Ada County Highway District and provides recommendations on pedestrian facilities. It's existed for about 1 year now. It came into effect, as we realized we have a bike group, we have an ADA group, we should probably have a group that's also focused on pedestrians. Right now, there's 10 members on it. They come from a variety of disciplines. We have folks from State Routes to Schools, Central District Health, the Walk Bike Alliance. We have folks from various of our partner agencies, so all the surrounding cities, Boise, Meridian, Eagle, etc. But it sounds like we may have an opening for somebody from Meridian to come in and sit on the board here soon. So we're interested in that. What this group has done typically is we're still sort of finding our groove. We've only been around for a year, so we're kind of establishing what it is we do, but I think we've started to slide into that. One of our big focuses right now is reviewing our prioritization criteria as we work to internally prioritize pedestrian projects, and how they, sort of rank with the dozens of other pedestrian projects we have at any given point. The pedestrian advisory groups had a great interest lately in taking walking tours, so we've been going out to projects that are in design right now and taking a look at them and having the group just kind of provide recommendation and guidance on how we can, maybe make it a little bit better from a pedestrian standpoint and just kind of put another set of eyes on it so that we can kind of understand what's going on. As we develop neighborhood plans, which we've been engaged in a lot lately, this year I think we're doing one out in Star, and then one in where's the other one that we're doing? Southwest-ish Boise. We're determining how to do that. And so they sit on that sort of team and provide guidance and walk us through that process. And it's also a great opportunity to learn a little bit more about ACHD's sort of processes and how we determine things and prioritize projects and come up with pedestrian infrastructure. So if anybody is interested, I think it's something that is a good opportunity. If anybody, you may want to just let Caleb know if that's something that you're interested in. We only meet once every other month, so it's not a huge time commitment. And then occasionally meet in the interim for a walking tour of some kind. We meet on the second Thursday of every month at 6 p.m. It's a 2-year term that would have to be what we would have you do is probably Meridian. We'd have the city of Meridian advance your name, and then our ACHD commission would approve it. So that's just a quick kind of rundown of what it is that the pedestrian advisory group is, and what we're kind of looking for out of a member. So if anybody has any questions or any interest, please let me know. Thank you.
Comments, questions? Any volunteers?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lewis? You're interested in joining this group?
Yes, I would be.
Okay. Mr. Hood, you have a candidate to put on the list to be considered? Mr. Lewis?
Thank you for that, for volunteering. Just as Mr. Cochran just mentioned, it's not official yet. The current Meridian rep has not officially submitted his resignation, but it's coming, I understand, from the Parks Director. Initially, when this group was formed, we thought maybe somebody from the Parks Commission made more sense, but in the first 3 meetings of this, he thought maybe it wasn't a good fit from the park side, so I do appreciate Mr. Lewis throwing his name in, and I have no doubt he will be appointed, but we need to circle back, and I've asked the Parks Director, John Naismith is the current rep, so just ask him to get his resignation in to ACHD, and then we'll backfill that with Mr. Lewis. So again, I appreciate that.
Mr. Cochran, I appreciate you coming and visiting with us today, and there's always an outstanding invitation to return.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Item 5C is completed. Item 5D, River Valley Street Crosswalk Request, memo from Mr. Hood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some of you, or maybe all of you, may have seen or read the Road Wizard in the Statesman, and if so, then this one should sound pretty familiar to you. I spoke to this gentleman, though, before that was printed in the Statesman, and promised him that I'd put it on the agenda. I wasn't quite sure if he would be here today or not to just sort of give his perspective and his request. But essentially what you have before you, and let me just zoom in. So Eagle Fairview, general intersection of Eagle Fairview. And there is a memo on page 16, 17, and then an exhibit on page 18 on this topic. This gentleman contacted me and ACHD, which is the right thing to do, right? Talked to ACHD, and he's already got the wheels kind of turning there. So again, I don't know if there's necessarily an action item for you all. If you read that memo, it seems like ACHD is already on this and doing some evaluation. So I won't spend too terribly much time, but I just want to orient you real quick. Again, Eagle Fairview, the Village, Kleiner Park. On the north side of that, River Valley Street, these are the Regency Apartments. The Boise Co-op is on the other side of River Valley Street. So the request is for a crosswalk in this general location. Again, on page 18, you can see an exhibit of what he put together that would connect essentially the apartments. And I'm going to zoom back out. I hope I don't make anybody dizzy. We are seeing quite a bit more residential and other development. This is kind of infilling another phase of Regency is coming online. So there is more and more people with Records Avenue being open now. Definitely see an uptick in pedestrian traffic. I don't know if he lives in the apartments or not, but there's several hundred units here. Several hundred more units, more under construction here. Just another kind of frame of reference. So on the other end of what they call the northern part of the village, the big anchors in here, there is an RRFB that was installed, I don't know, a couple years ago maybe, something like that, in this location. So Marshall's, Big Al's is on the other side. So this kind of would make it symmetrical, if you will. Both public streets, East Village Drive, River Valley Street, I don't know volumes, but volumes of pedestrians or cars for that matter. But you do have a signalized intersection here at River Valley. And so again, I don't think there's necessarily any action, but if you want to talk about this one, ACHD is already looking into it, but at the time, I promised this gentleman I would put it on your agenda to discuss. So there you have it. And we can talk about it or move on or make comments to ACHD while they're here. That's what I have, Mr. Chair.
Any follow-up to Mr. Hood, commissioners?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
All right, I muted myself. Mr. Hood, just a quick follow-up question. Is the proposal or request for a pedestrian signal along with a crosswalk or just for a crosswalk?
It's a good question, Mr. Chair, Commissioner. We didn't get into the exact treatment. His letter talks about crosswalk, and again, I think that'll kind of defer. And Miranda and I actually had a similar conversation not too long ago. What we talked about was let's show the problem, and ACHD will tell you what a viable solution is, whether it's painting a sign or just paint, or painting a sign and some flashers, or so. Okay. Again, I didn't get too much into all the options that are maybe on the table for him. His point, I think, is some designated marked. I mean, it's an unmarked crosswalk right now. He would like some real or perceived protection crossing that roadway is what I gathered from him speaking with him on the phone.
Okay. Like some real versus perceived.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I was wondering if Mr. Martin had a take on that, what his opinion on that crosswalk would be.
Sure. Commissioners, what we'll do is we'll go out and we'll place some kind of observation device, whether it be a person or something to record video on, and then we'll go and take that back to the office. And we'll also go out there and take traffic counts. So the three main things, I guess, that we're kind of looking at is how many pedestrians are crossing there, the speed of the roadway, which we can either take from the speed limit itself or observed how fast cars are going, and then also how many cars a day are using that roadway. Those are the three things we would look at to determine, one, if anything is needed, and then if something is needed, what would be needed. Generally speaking, a crosswalk with signs by themselves aren't very effective. Drivers don't stop for people that just paint and a sign. That's why you see the RFB on Village Drive. And my guess is on River Valley, you're going to have more traffic on River Valley than you do on Village Drive. just a question of how many pedestrians are actually crossing there. So my guess is at this point, without seeing data, is you probably have to some kind of enhanced protection and not just a crosswalk or a sign. That wouldn't be enough.
Thank you.
So this is an item to keep our eye on then.
Yeah, so I didn't get a chance to talk to Amy, who was the one who wrote the email, to see where this is, but it's not something that would take but, a month or so to go out and do some observation just to get it in the queue of other things we have going on.
Mr. Hood, could we put that on our agenda to look at in the March, April meetings? Or just a follow-up? Or commissioners, or do you suggest a different approach? Okay, let's put it on a reminder to revisit this say in March, Mr. Hood.
Mr. Chair, I'll put it under old business, and then when ACHD is ready to report out, we'll get that report.
Okay, very good. Item 5D. Item 5E, 2018 City Transportation Priorities.
Mr. Chair, that's me again. I know you approved the minutes, but just as a quick refresher, so last month we actually made it through roadways and intersections. So what I would ask this meeting is that we try to finalize community programs projects for 2018, so we can get that to the city council and have that back to ACHD by March 16th is their deadline. So this information begins on page 19 in your packet. Again, we used wholly used Commissioner Lewis's recommendation for priorities last month with a couple of notations on looking at a 5-lane roadway there on Locust Grove, but it was basically the same priority list. Since the January meeting, and I mentioned this during the last discussion, I met with the school district representative. We sat down, compared our lists. I did not have the resources to integrate her draft priority list with the one that you looked at last month. So you really have two lists in your packet. So I'm going to break it apart. I actually printed some copies, and I pressed print, and they came out in black and white, so they're not as easy, but I didn't want to burn a bunch more paper to print it in color. So if you're so inclined, this is the school district list that's in your packet. So what I've done, just looking at the school district list, and is really kind of come up with 3 different classifications of what they have. The ones that are in green, and the good news on the black and white is green you can't read, which is okay because it means it's on our list already. So we don't probably need to talk about it too much, but we can if you want to. The gray color are the ones that are on the school district's list that aren't currently on our list. So the question is, kind of the bigger question is, do we want to include them? Should we include them? And if so, where in the priority rank do we want to include them in our list? It is all on the table. So again, we didn't spend any time on this last month. So the draft list that you have, the first list in the packet, really hasn't been tweaked thus far. We did get some comments from both Commissioner Lancaster and Commissioner Lewis last time, but didn't talk about them. So, and you both commented, if memory serves, on the railroad trail, and should that be the city's #1 priority on this list? Are we getting the biggest bang, essentially, for our buck on that? But other than that, we haven't really talked about my draft, if you will, 2018, and Miranda's draft, if you will, 2018, and what that looks like. So, I don't know if you want me to talk anymore. I do have Google Earth up, or Google Maps up, which, by the way, it looks like they've updated recently for our area, so pretty cool. It's some pretty recent aerial photography if you want to go check it out. But I can zoom to areas, we can look at it. That's kind of what I anticipated doing is, I don't know if we want to do each and every one of these, but certainly a majority of them. Let's get oriented, let's understand, even with Miranda's help, what the issue really is, talk about it, and again, see if it makes sense to include some school district projects on our list, and if so, high, medium, low type of thing. So at your mercy there, Mr. Chair, the rest of the commission, on how you'd like to proceed. I can zoom into the first one and we can go from there, or go a whole different route, whatever you would like to do.
Commissioners? Mr. Lancaster?
Mr. Chairman, a couple questions right off. So, Caleb may have answered this in his monologue, if you will, but a question I had in reviewing the packet for today is it didn't have a summary, I guess, of the roadway and intersection projects from last month. So my question is, should I take from that that's been, decided on last month and we moved on from that?
We've moved on.
All right, fair enough. Okay. And my second question is, I guess I'm asking for a reminder about how the city priorities work versus the school district's priorities. So do both submit a list to ACHD? Okay, so I guess we both have a voice in that. So we don't necessarily have to, I mean, we could agree with the school districts completely, or we could say, no, we think it's, we don't want that at all, or somewhere in between. Okay, all right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lewis?
I would suggest that we look on the map at the school districts number 1 and 7, because those seem to be the higher dollar items. One's in orange, the rest of them seem to be, at least at first glance, more low dollar items. So I'd suggest we focus on 1 and 7.
Okay.
Chair, if I can, I should have pointed this out. There's actually the first, it's kind of hard to see. There's a little break there. You see community programs, right? So when you say number 1, 1 and 7 are actually roadway projects. So the first 2 you see on there are under roadways. We can talk, and we do need to talk about them. Sorry, I didn't orient you that way.
I'm sorry, I meant 1 and 7 under community programs. I wasn't talking.
I just want to make sure we're on the same page, and so everybody else understands.
Yep.
What they have under 1 for roadways isn't on our community programs list. So, okay, so I'll zoom into 8th Street at Meridian Middle.
Yes, thank you.
Let me kind of, and Miranda, feel free to jump in, Mr. Chair, if that's okay. Let me just kind of paint the picture a little bit for you. So Meridian Middle School, their front door, you can get in, I think, both of these doors, and there's probably other ways back behind here. But a lot of kids will take, there's a cross, you can see the crosswalk here. There's kind of a goat trail that ties into the rest of this neighborhood, and you get a lot of the kids coming out to 8th Street right at this crosswalk. Well, it gets busy with cars parked on both sides of that crosswalk, some near misses, and so the request basically is around this intersection that's just south of, well, I can measure it. Here's Cherry Lane, so Cherry and 8th. So in this general vicinity, I believe, is that signalized pedestrian crossing request of the school district.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask a question?
Yes, Mr. Lewis.
In the notes, Caleb, it talks about this was previously on our list, but it's not anymore. Can you tell me the history of that?
Yeah, so a couple years ago, there was a particular parent that was concerned, just for what I described, that people would speed through here, the visibility, because there is on-street parking here. You wouldn't know until you're up on the crosswalk that there's a flagger there. And they did have a crossing guard that they ended up putting out there for some of those peak times, but just was concerned. Honestly, I don't know why or how it came off the list. I do not recall, and I should have looked at that before this meeting. But it was something that I talked with both the principal of Meridian Middle about, and this mother who was quite frustrated about that signal. And I don't remember if we asked ACHD to look into it, and it was something that they said, nah, it doesn't make sense, or why it came off the list. So I do apologize. I meant to do that after I met with Miranda, and just did not. It could have simply just been an error, that it fell off because I deleted the wrong row or something in it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, that wasn't much help.
That's okay.
And Mr. Chairman, I seem to remember that this commission has talked about that crossing in the past, yeah.
Where would we
In there.
want to put this on our chart?
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Ms. Carson?
Obviously, because it's number one on our list, I would ask that you put it high on your list. We had 2 students hit there last year, so it's not just something could happen. Something has happened multiple times, so.
Mr. Lewis, do you find a place to shuffle
Where's-
that in?
Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt, but I am going to. Just as an option, number 6 on the city's list could be one that we totally take off the list, because as I listed under transportation projects, that's a roadway project that is moving forward through design and actually will go into construction soon. So we could simply, if you wanted to, we could take project number 6, which is Eagle Road Amity Victory, off of the list, because that will be addressed with the roadway project, RD 207-33. It's not in the top 5, but it's in the top 6 anyways. I mean, there's one where you could put that there and then do some more jockeying if you'd like. I don't know how, that's with, I wouldn't do that if this were our roadway list. I probably wouldn't do it with a roadway project, but since it's a community programs list, it's gonna be addressed with a roadway project. I wouldn't go the other way. If this were on the community program list, I wouldn't take it off of our roadways list, right? So,
Mr.
As an
Chairman, I
option.
think that's a good idea. I think we should copy community programs number 1 from the school district's list and overwrite our number 6 on our community programs list.
Is there a motion?
I missed that. What was it? Say that again, sorry.
So the number 6 on community programs, on our community programs list would drop off. In its place, we would put the number 1 community programs from the school district list.
I would support that.
I have a motion. Is there a second? I have a second from Mr. Hall. So the motion is to drop city's proposed community program 6, drop that, and put in the school district's number 1. I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. You're halfway home, Ms. Carson.
Thank you.
And Mr. Lewis, you still had an issue on 7?
Ian Stoddard?
Hey, so the Meridian Rail with Trail, excuse me, Mr. Chairman,
Yes?
where's that at? I mean, we keep putting that up there. Are we closer to anything there? I mean, it would seem to me like we would move the school district's request up higher and maybe push those down a little bit, especially if we're looking at the rail with trail system being 5 years out.
So, Mr. Chair, I'll address the part of that, and you guys can talk about the other part, what priority number it should be.
Yeah.
Progress, though, regarding railroad trail, we are making some. We have, as has been reported before, the first half mile from Meridian Road back to about 7th, 8th Street here in downtown, heading west, is in design right-of-way. We're in right-of-way negotiations to try to acquire a little piece of that we need to make that whole half mile work. There are some other segments, I think even in PD, or maybe that's in PD. We're in constant communications about this. There's a work group formed at Compass. Certainly, even in the next 5 years, we're not going to have the full 33 miles from Boise to Nampa and even into Caldwell, but we're making slow progress. Even this first half mile, though, I want to clarify, that's not within the rail corridor. It's out of corridor. So we haven't made a whole bunch of progress with Union Pacific on actually an easement, obtaining their property to do this. So I'm not going to fault you if you move it down, but it is, as far as pedestrian projects go, this is the city's number one priority. I don't care where you put it on this list. That's what we're spending the most resources on trying to get done. Yeah, baby steps, just to be honest. I mean, it's not progressing very rapidly, but we are moving forward.
And by having that at number one, does that carry more weight to pushing it forward?
So, Mr. Chair, my position or analysis on that would be with ACHD, no. It's not very strategic with ACHD. However, when it comes to talking to Union Pacific or going after a grant or those types of things, yes, it is to have it be the number one. So again, who's your audience? We're sending this to ACHD. We're throwing away those bonus points. But we also use this other places for other reasons to say, look, this is our number one priority. So is that your concern? You could make it or not. I'm just letting you know kind of some of the rest of how we use this priority list isn't just for ACHD, it's used for other reasons, so.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Leslie.
So on the school district's recommendation for 9, the East McMillan Road, Red Horse to Locust Grove, install sidewalks on the north side. I think that the comments are wrong because it says Ustick Elementary. That's walking distance to Prospect Elementary. And the Granger Drive, I think, is in relation to Ustick Elementary as well. Caleb, can you bring that up on the map? There's a new street that was put in there that now connects to McMillan.
One Red Horse.
So Locust Grove and McMillan. So there's a Timberline now connects to McMillan. And that gap is there between just west of Timberline. Go to the west there.
Where am I at? Here's Red Horse.
So you can see the gap there between Saguaro Canyon subdivision and where Timberline is, that little section. So that's on private property, but I think they've already started working on that. Because I saw work being done out there. It looks like they're putting a new path in.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
I've got knowledge on that because I did the easements. Our Parks Department Trails Coordinator was successful in negotiating with the 2 property owners there. I believe that the city is kicking in a fence and helping them move a berm, but the construction you're seeing is intended to bridge that gap. Am I right? Is that your
Yeah,
knowledge?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Mr. Baird. So I did talk to Kimberly Warren in Parks last week as well, and if you'll see the note, so just one clarification. So this black and white is the school district's notes in their list, right? But in your packet on page 20, I did put that in the notes section, the far right-hand column under number 2, sidewalk gap near Larkwood subdivision being pursued with LTAC grant, and I think that was a comment, either Commissioner Lancaster or Lewis, I can't remember which. Are we successful in this? If so, let's move this down or take it off the list or whatever. When I talked to Kimberly last week, they hadn't been notified yet that they were successful in obtaining the LTAC grant to construct this. So the easements we may have, the construction dollars, as of last Thursday when I was putting this packet together, they had not been awarded, although she said they were supposed to know by February 1. So she was going to call LTAC to see, and maybe, I don't know if Tony's heard any more on that, but she said she hadn't heard back, but they were late in announcing who won those grants.
They haven't awarded yet, but they've posted a list of the rankings, and the city isn't high enough on the list. I hate sharing that kind of news, but anyway.
So again, I would then, with that, recommend we leave this on here, even though we've got the easements to construct it, we don't have the money for the actual construction of the pathway. Yeah, anyways, so.
Okay, thank you.
so we have discussed the school district's items 7 and 9.
No, we haven't talked about 7 yet.
I'll go back to
We
7.
started to and then got off on a tangent.
Right, I was just reviewing the bidding, so.
Oh,
So are we leaving 9 alone?
Yes.
That's,
yes, I think we are.
okay. Sorry, Ms. Carson. Okay. 7, Mr. Lewis.
So the comment from Mr. Hood is that this could be included in one of our roadway projects? Is that right?
No, to modify number 20 on the pedestrian. So here's kind of the story with, let me just orient you a little bit. There's like 3 or 4 projects that are all listed independently today on these lists. One of them is to fill in the gap all along Victory Road, and this could be modified to put the pedestrian signal in. So fill in the sidewalk gap and install a pedestrian signal. We won't say RRFB, right, because those aren't, but some crossing here, again, with Google Maps being pretty updated, there's some newer lots and subdivisions and development happening out here, and you're getting more and more kids that, whether it's during school or after school activities or whatever, might want to get to the middle school that was constructed just last year here, mid-mile at Stoddard at Kodiak. So that's one kind of standalone request, is a crossing here. And that's what, again, number 7 is. Install enhanced pedestrian signal at Victory at Stoddard. So that's where we're at here. If you look at number 20 on the city's list, then that is defined as Kentucky Ridgeway, Ruidoso Drive, Victory Road, sidewalk on the west side of Kentucky Ridgeway. So this is an older subdivision with no sidewalk, so putting sidewalk to pick subdivision up to get them to Victory. Then Victory across, and then there's another project on Stoddard, actually 2. Let's see, what numbers are they? Yeah, number 5 on the cities, Stoddard Road, Victory to Kodiak. So again, if you look primarily, to be fair, the east side does have sidewalk. That's Bear Creek, that's city subdivision. So if you cross the kids, like we were just talking about, if you crossed them on this side of the road, they could continue on the east side of the road up to Kodiak to get to school, cross here, right? We'll talk about that in a second. But if they stayed on the west side of the road, there's a bunch of county properties and no pedestrian facilities. So that's what you see as number 5 on the city's list. And then finally, on the school district's list, help me out, Miranda, if you've identified it before I have. There's a small gap north. I'm just going to tell you, I don't know where it's at. There's a small gap north at Idaho Power has a substation.
It's number 4 on the district list.
So and that one's also on our list, so number 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got modify city number 5 scope to include this parcel. There's a small parcel here that doesn't have in front of the Idaho Power substation that, again, kind of does the same thing we're just talking. It's just a small gap here. To me, you could group those into a couple of things instead of having 4 or 5 different projects. Say, listen, Overland to, and I don't know, you guys can do with what you want, but you could potentially group all of them. Overland to Kentucky Ridgeway. I don't think ACHD will construct it that way. We probably do need to break it out north and south of Kodiak, or however you want to do that there. But essentially, there are 4 projects there that are there. So
That all tie into one.
that all are around the middle school. And the other one that we don't have is, and again, I don't recall what number this is. Right now, school district would like this to be an enhanced crossing. So is that number 8 on their list? It's actually number 5 on ours. So it's on. That's where I have it. The descriptions are a little bit. That's why I put in the notes. I'll modify number 5 slightly to marry it up with the school district's description if you're okay. If not, let me know. So it's kind of on our list now. I colored it green, but I'm going to slightly tweak the description. Sorry, I should have done a better job of laying the Stoddard Kodiak stuff out for you, but
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Lewis.
So then I would recommend that we modify our community programs number 5 to include the enhanced pedestrian crossing that is the school district's number 7.
Is there a second on that?
I second that.
Okay, Mr. Hopkins? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Mr. Lewis, what else is on the table for the school district?
That's all that I had,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
A lot of the rest of them, Mr. Chairman, as you go down, are painted crosswalks. So if you want to add them to the list, I would recommend we put them at or end of the, I mean, it doesn't hurt anything, I guess, to put them on the list. It's up to you though, and that's pretty much what I said for the rest of these is add it to the end of the list or near the end of the list type of a thing, but it's up to you. And I'm happy to zoom into them, or we can leave our list as is.
Okay. Mr. Hood's made a suggestion that we add the school district's community programs to the end of the city's list. Want to put that in a motion?
Yeah, for those not already mentioned or discussed, I'd move to do that.
Okay, is there a second? Second. Mr. Davis, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Any other discussion points on the community programs?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lancaster?
as I look at on the Meridian list, numbers 16, 17, 16 and 17 in particular, so I see that they've been moved down significantly from last year, or Caleb's proposed that anyway. And I can see why, because they say signalized pedestrian crossing part of Rails with Trails project, which is already number 1. So do we need those on this list at all? So if they're already on here as part of number 1, do we need them again as 16 and 17?
So, Mr. Chair, and I know this isn't necessarily Sean's area of expertise, but I would defer to him a little bit. As we're just kind of talking here with Stoddard and Kodiak and Victory, they tend to break them up into bite-sized chunks, right? Railroad Trail, you can't, no, we're not going to do the 8 miles that are Meridian in one phase. So we've historically called out any crossings that, arterial road crossings that maybe need a little love as a separate project, but we could add them in the future too. I mean, if we just want to track Railroad Trail as one project, and then when that starts to get momentum, add the 4 arterial crossings that are in Meridian back to the list. I don't necessarily have any heartburn with that, but the reality is at some point in time, if we want ACHD to partner with us on making those crossings, they probably need to be explicit, you know, with scopes that are here to here type of a thing. So I don't necessarily have any heartburn if we take them off. I don't know that it hurts anything to leave them on though either, quite frankly.
Mr. Chair, if I can just give
Carson?
strictly an opinion on that. As Caleb said, using this list for things other than just giving to ACHD, it helps to show stakeholders when they come in and say, hey, we hear you're getting a railroad or a railroad trail here. You gonna put a crossing here? We can say it's already on our list. It's been on our list. We're making sure we're looking towards the future for that. So just something to show community members that it's already on the list, even if we put it at the bottom, just showing that it's there, and it makes it easier to track year to year as well.
Very good. So, how do we want to handle this question, or just, you had brought that up, Mr. Lancaster, and
Yeah.
put a pushback to leave it on? A whole lot of pushback to leave it on.
Maybe move it to the bottom?
Pardon me?
Maybe move it to the bottom?
We already have it at 16 and 17, that's pretty.
Yeah, remind me where where we stop getting points. Is it top 20 or top 10 or 15 or?
Mr. Chair, it's not past 10. I don't remember exactly, but I believe it's the top 10 is where you get your bonus points. So it's 10, 1 gets 10, 10 gets 1.
The rest gets nothing.
So it gets nothing, yeah. Okay. I guess I'm just not seeing the value of saying, this is our number one priority, or it's also our 16 priority and our 17 priority, pick a number and stick with it. Right? That's my thought. I'm not gonna propose a motion that we already established that it doesn't get us or any points or hurt us by prohibiting anything else from moving up on the list, so it's my observation and comment, and whatever we choose to do with it, or not do with it, is fine.
Okay. Anything else on that point?
Mr. Chair, if I can just reiterate, not within that point, but again, really the top 10 is if I want to make sure you're most comfortable with those top 10, 11, maybe even 12 projects, because those will likely be the ones to move into the top 10 next year. But yeah, thank you for that bringing us back to reality here. It really is just your top few pet projects, and how do those look?
And Mr. Chairman, I guess I'll note that, by and large, we're just moving up the projects from last year, filling in, where projects were built or included in other projects or whatnot, and I'm comfortable with that. So I don't have a whole lot of comments as far as big swing is up or down in the list.
Okay, so with the two changes that we've talked about, we're comfortable with the list as presented?
I am, yeah.
Okay. We need to formalize that, or? Please. Okay. Louis, do you have a motion?
Sure. With the two changes we've already voted on, I move that we accept the community programs list.
Do I have a second?
I second that, Mr. Chairman.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Mr. Hood, you have that recommendation, and we appreciate your work.
Until next year, thank you.
Okay. 5E is off the list. 5F, staff communications. And again, Mr. Hood, you're still on the line.
This one's pretty easy. Pages 25 and 26 seem pretty self-explanatory. In fact, I already talked about 25 when I went through the transportation projects update item. I would just encourage you to spend a little bit of time on Harvest Transit's report this last month. They're pretty proud of themselves these days, and they're doing some good things, it looks like, with ridership numbers. So I'm not gonna run through it, but that was a handout that they provided recently that I thought, well, in fact, Mr. Chair, you, I believe, were there and have the.
Meeting, yeah, very encouraging those.
With that, nothing really else to draw to your attention there.
Okay. Any comments, discussion? 5F is concluded. We're moving on to future meeting topics. Have we left anything on the table not completed or out there hanging? And hearing none? Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Future meeting topics. Compression brakes, Lime bike, bike share.
So just, Mr. Chair, real quick on that one. We had a representative from Lime Bike contact us, and I invited her to your March meeting, so hopefully that's okay, but
Sure.
be here and talk about that, and maybe even have a broader discussion on bike share in Meridian and what that looks like. So
Okay.
you can Google it if you're curious what that is, but they'll be here in March.
We've got a Linder Village project update sometime coming up in May, Community in Motion, National Mobility Map, ACHD Master Street Map, Comprehensive Plan Update. Mr. Hood, where was that committee to review, interject on the comprehensive plan?
Good question, Mr. Chair. The city issued a RFP in January. So there is a request for proposals to help the city with a new comprehensive plan. You may have even seen some of that in the press here recently. So we're looking to hire somebody, have them under contract here this spring, and part of that would be then to engage with the Transportation Commission on transportation type of topics, as we talked about, I think it was September. But until we have that kind of a scope of work fully defined with them and what that looks like, I don't have a whole bunch to report, but that is out on the street right now. We hope to award the bid again March or maybe April.
So there's still seats on the bus to work on that?
Absolutely. You guys are volunteered, so we're going to use you as, again, I don't know exactly what form that will take, but largely as a steering committee for transportation projects.
Mr. Lewis appreciated my transit joke, so.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Pedestrian signal at Meridian Road, okay, so that's still the crosswalk just behind us here. Local jurisdiction on state highways.
This is something that came up at the end of our meeting last month that you brought up, Mr. Chair, about restrictions on state highways that locals impose. So I did get a phone message back from Ms. Bowen late last week. Haven't had a chance to circle back with her on that voice message. Honestly, I don't know if it'll actually be a future meeting topic, but I wanted you particularly, but the rest of the commission to know we're looking into that. And depending on kind of where that plays out, and probably talk to an attorney or two here at the city, we'll circle back in some form on that.
If nothing else, I thought it was an educational component on just understanding that a little bit. Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Lancaster.
I could probably speak to that topic sometime, if you'd like as well, as part of the commission meeting.
Well, so we will just volunteer you then, is that what you're asking?
That's fine. I'm here anyway, so.
Mr. Chair, I don't want to belabor this too much, but Ms. Bowen did talk to ITD attorneys, so you might just want to just make sure you're looped back with her and understand, or party line is being followed in whatever presentation you give there too. So, but I appreciate the offer. So,
Mr. Baird, that was
closer to the attorneys than she does, so.
That was just some general comments on an educational component to.
I think that's fine. Following up on Caleb's comment, I think it makes sense to hear from Erica, hear what she said, then I would love to hear Chairman or Commissioner Lancaster's take on it, because you've got a different perspective, and that's why you're here. So let's bring it all.
Okay. So we'll let you know which corner to go to.
Yeah, I see that you're setting me up for a fight. Thank you for that.
Like you set yourself up for the fight.
Future meeting topics, that's not an exclusive list. If you have an idea to put on that list, I would ask you to come forward.
Mr. Chairman, there is one that I'd like to add.
Okay.
This is one that I've been thinking about in the last month or two.
We would make that J, item J.
And I would hope that it would be a topic that we could discuss when Sergeant Arnold is here, because I'm very interested in his experience and feedback. But the topic being the school zone on Meridian Road, so just outside the doors here from south of Pine up to somewhere between Pine and Fairview. It's been my observation that the school zone is obeyed fairly well until the signal at Pine. And if the driver, stops at the red signal at Pine, that it's pretty well forgotten after Pine. And so I'm interested in Sergeant Arnold's feedback or, enforcement experience there and potential discussion.
So the road is, you said south of Pine and Fairview.
Yeah, so the school zone runs from south of Pine to some distance north of Pine, and it seems to be interrupted at the signal at Pine. So it's a fairly long school zone, and I wonder if it's even enforceable.
Okay, all right, very good. Any other comments? With that, I would ask for, let's see, our next meeting is Monday, March 5th. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're gone. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be gone March 5th.